Welcome back, everyone. In this video today, we're diving into Chapter 21 of the American Yawp. This one is titled World War I and its Aftermath. And so what have we gone through so far? We've dealt with the late 19th century, the Gilded Age. We've culminated that with the Progressive Era. The United States is getting involved in other affairs around the world through American imperialism, and this is going to be the big daddy of getting involved in other nations. And we're going to try very hard to stay out of it. So we'll kind of see how this works out. This is going to be very much a European history class as well, because we need to understand the reasons for World War I as well, or the Great War, if you prefer. Now, this chapter is going to explore the causes of World War I, the Great War, experiences of American soldiers, and also the profound impact of the war that it's going to have on all the nations involved. So let's get this thing started. Now, the roots of World War I can be traced back to a complex web of alliances, militarism, imperialism, and nationalism in Europe. In fact, you can even use the acronym MAIN, M-A-I-N, militarism, alliances, imperialism, nationalism. So if you're trying to remember what the causes are, if you remember those words and remember what those words mean, they'll help you understand it. You might see that on an exam or some kind of an essay. If you're writing an essay for your class, it might be good to help you remember when it comes down to discussing those causes. Now, tensions were high as European powers competed for colonies and influence. And ultimately, it's going to be the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary in June of 1914 that's going to ignite these tensions into a full-blown conflict. Now, I want to go back a little bit, and I want to leave the textbook for a second and discuss some deeper causes of this war. And I want to go all the way back to 1870, 1871. Because it was in 1870 and 1871 that France and Prussia, there was no Germany yet. Germany was a collection of small German-speaking kingdoms, and Prussia was probably the most powerful of those. Prussia and France goes to war, and Prussia is going to absolutely devastate France. The Franco-Prussian War, it pretty much knocks France off of its position as being probably the most powerful army on the continent. And that changes with the Franco-Prussian War. Germany declares itself to be a nation at the end of that war. In fact, they do this in the Palace of Versailles in Paris, in the Hall of Mirrors there, and it's going to be very insulting to the French. And so the French have lost lands as well, particularly the Alsace-Lorraine region of eastern France. Germany claims that territory, and it's very important to the French culturally. And so this is sort of hanging out in the background. And so what happens? France starts to make alliances that Germany doesn't know about. Germany starts making alliances that France doesn't know about. So when the Archduke Franz Ferdinand is killed in 1914, we're going to start to see some of those alliances start to be called in. So following the assassination, a series of diplomatic failures and mobilizations are going to quickly escalate into war involving multiple nations. And we're going to see us divided into two groups. We've got the Allies, formerly the Triple Entente. This is primarily France, Britain, and Russia. And they're going to face off against the Central Powers, formerly the Triple Alliance, led by Germany and Austria-Hungary. And, of course, we've got triple there. Italy is involved for a while. And eventually, the Ottoman Empire. And by August of 1914, all of Europe will be engulfed in this war. And we can start calling it a world war mainly because all these countries have colonies spread out around the globe. Now, in the early years of the war, the United States is going to adopt a policy of neutrality. We want to stay out of it. But many Americans believed that the conflict was a European affair and sought to avoid being drawn into it. Now, there's going to be several factors that's going to shift public policy and opinion here. For example, starting very early in the war, Germany begins to use submarines, U-boats. And so German U-boat attacks on American merchant ships, including, the Lusitania is not an American ship. It's a British ship, but there are Americans on board. And other ships that do belong to American merchants are going to be attacked by German submarines. And this resulted in the death of American passengers, and it's going to cause Americans to start getting angry. And they're going to start to express that anger publicly and begin to call for our government to potentially go to war or try to find some way in which to try to find some way in which to end this threat to American shipping and American trade. And additionally, the Zimmerman telegram. This is a letter sent from a German ambassador, basically to Mexico. And it's intercepted by the British. And what did this letter do? It's an attempt to create a military alliance with Mexico against the United States. If the war keeps going, if the United States starts to make moves to enter the war, then the proposition is, hey, Mexico, if you will go to war with alongside Germany, if you will go to war with the United States, and you will keep them out of a greater European war, then we'll make sure you get California, New Mexico, Arizona, maybe even parts of Texas back, areas that you once had owned but don't have any longer, either because of the Mexican-American War or through other factors. And so that's the Zimmerman telegram. This gets intercepted. Now, these two things are going to be key when it comes down to President Woodrow Wilson asking Congress for a declaration of war against Germany on April the 2nd, 1917. And he basically states that the world must be made safe for democracy, that we need to fight one last war to make the world safe. This would be the war to end all wars. And so by April the 6th, and it's certainly not a unanimous decision within Congress, but by April 6th, the United States had officially entered World War I. Now, it takes a while to get ready because we do not have a standing army. We're going to have to start to recruit, and we're going to have to train, and then we're going to have to deploy. Now, once involved, the United States will mobilize its resources and manpower for this war effort. The Selective Service Act, a form of which is still around today, which enacted to draft soldiers. And so today, as a young man at about the age of 18, you enlist in the Selective Service. And if there's ever going to be a draft again, hopefully there won't be, but if there is, that Selective Service list is how they start to do conscription or draft to build up the Army to wartime levels. Millions of Americans are going to enlist in the armed forces, some of which by volunteer and others through the draft. And this influx of troops was vital in reinforcing what, by the time we get involved, exhausted Allied forces. Now, on the home front, the government's going to establish organizations like the War Industries Board to coordinate the production of war materials, to make sure we have enough guns and bullets and various other things that our soldiers need in the field. And citizens are going to be encouraged to buy Liberty bonds. These are loans to the government. Buy these, and the money goes to the government to support our fighting men overseas. We're also encouraged to conserve resources through rationing, rationing means we're going to cut back on how much we eat. We only buy certain things certain days. The Food Administration, for example, wheatless Wednesdays. So on Wednesdays, don't eat bread and pasta. Meatless Mondays. Go vegan on Mondays. And that's going to cut down on how much we're consuming. And eventually, we're also going to see like little ration books to make sure that you're not buying more than what you should be. And so those are some things that people on the home front are doing to support our men overseas. Now, American soldiers, known as doughboys, are going to face grueling conditions in the trenches. We call them doughboys because it's like dough that hasn't been baked yet. We haven't experienced the war just yet. So these are inexperienced young men. Life will be harsh. These trenches that are going to be dug will be filled with mud, disease, huge rats, and constant threats of enemy fire. And the war would be characterized by trench warfare, leading to devastating casualties and stalemate on the Western Front. And the Western Front is going to be that area of Eastern France and Western Germany. And the area between the lines will be called the no man's land. And it'll be a devastating just wasteland. Now, there's some great movies that I would throw out there that might be worth seeing. The movie War Horse is a good one. Steven Spielberg made a movie called War Horse, and it kind of shows both sides of the war. Any of the versions of All Quiet on the Western Front is an awesome World War I themed movie that gives you a good idea of it. Another one called Flyboys with James Franco. These are all pretty good films if you're into Hollywood and you just want to get a pretty good little idea of what we're talking about here. Now, back to the war itself. Significant battles such as the Battle of Verdun, Verdun, and the Battle of the Somme, these are going to result in massive loss of life and little territorial gain. In fact, sometimes they will go years and the battle lines will move only a few miles. Now, the introduction of new technologies, tanks, poison gas, machine guns, airplanes. This is the first war in which aircraft will be used. These are going to make war even more deadly. Now, the war finally comes to an end on November the 11th, 1918, and that's why we celebrate that as Veterans Day. And it ends with the signing of what we call an armistice. This would be a ceasefire. So on November the 11th, on the 11th month, the 11th day, at the 11th hours, 11 o'clock in the morning, 1918, World War I will end. The Treaty of Versailles was signed in 1919. It's going to impose harsh penalties on Germany and redraw the map of Europe. The lands they had taken from France go back to France. But even more so than that, Germany is told that your military has to be dissolved. Its naval vessels and U-boats will be scattered across other Allied ports. That basically all these things are taken from them. They're going to owe huge amounts of money to the victorious nations, something like $33 billion worth of reparations. And by the way, that's $33 billion in their money, not today's. Now, President Woodrow Wilson is going to advocate for a way to prevent future war, and he's going to call this the 14 points. And it emphasizes self-determination and the establishment of a League of Nations to promote peace. It's an early version of today's United Nations. But you know what? Americans, disillusioned by war, they're wary of foreign entanglements, they oppose the League of Nations. And several reasons for this. The League of Nations, if it went into place, if it needed to get involved in a war to keep the peace, all member nations would be forced to become involved. And we don't want to be told that we're going to go to war with another nation. And if we need to do it, then we'll do it. But we don't want to be told that. So it's going to lead to an eventual failure. In fact, Woodrow Wilson goes on a speaking tour around the nation. And he says, you know what, support this League of Nations. Support the Treaty of Versailles. Call your congressmen, call your senators, because senators are the ones that approve any treaties that are made. And while he's on that speaking tour, he has a massive stroke, and pretty much for the rest of his presidency, he's going to be bedridden, and so others are going to have to take up the slack. His vice president does not take over in his place. Now, the aftermath of World War I is going to bring about significant social changes to America. The return of soldiers will lead to economic adjustments, and many workers are going to seek better wages and better working conditions, resulting in widespread strikes. So in 1919 to about 1921, things are kind of chaotic in the United States. And we'll see some of that in the next chapter as we move into the 1920s, the roaring 20s, the Jazz Age, whichever you prefer. Now, additionally, the post-war period is going to be marked also by the Red Scare, because during the war, Russia becomes the Soviet Union. Communism rises up, a revolution kills the ruling family there, the Romanovs, and here in the United States, we're afraid that the communist movements, particularly with these labor strikes, that there are those that are trying to spread communism here, and there were some that were. We're going to call this the Red Scare. Eventually, we'll call it the first Red Scare because we'll have another one after World War II. So this government is going to start to crack down on perceived threats, leading to the Palmer raids, which targets activists, labor activists, and leftists, and it's going to undermine civil liberties in the name of national security. In fact, we see the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, established pretty much to combat some of this, what's happening in the early part of the 1920s. So in summary, this chapter is going to take us through the causes, or has taken us through the causes, events, and aftermath of World War I. We've highlighted how it reshaped America and the world. And from the decision to enter the war to the experiences of soldiers in the trenches, which we didn't spend a lot of time on, but there's some awesome videos out there, like the Century America's Time, the Shell-Shocked video does a great job of this. Go check those out. But we're going to see societal changes and political changes that come about from this war. And the Great War is going to leave an indelible mark on U.S. history, because as we go through the next 20 years, many of the folks, the movers and shakers, were involved in World War I. If you're into Lord of the Rings, if you're into fantasy, and I know he's not an American, but J.R.R. Tolkien was deeply inspired by World War I when he wrote his Lord of the Rings trilogy. So, major fan here. All right, so thanks for joining me in this review of Chapter 21. I hope you found this helpful. And as always, if you want to hit the like button or subscribe if I post out little individual videos, or as I continue through this series, you'll be the first to know. So take care, do well in your tests, and I'll see you on the next one.